must understand first that control is not merely a matter of chains, laws, or authority. Control is a psychological transaction, an agreement, sometimes silent, sometimes unconscious, between the one who seeks to dominate and the one who allows themselves to be dominated. It is in this hidden exchange that the drama of the human soul unfolds, and it is here that the empath, the deeply sensitive soul, must confront a paradox, for the empath is by nature a receiver of impressions, a vessel into which the world pours its pain, its unspoken needs, and its hidden currents. And yet some empaths, though equally open to the whispers of others, cannot be controlled. They walk through the same fields of influence as all others, but they are untouched, as though they carry a light. No shadow can fully grasp why. The answer is not sentimental. It is not because of kindness or because life has rewarded them for their compassion. It is because they have done what most fear to do. They have met their own shadow. And in that meeting, they have ended the secret contract upon which control depends. You see, control takes root in the unexamined darkness within us, the guilt we do not name, the fear we disguise as politeness, the old wounds we carry like invisible debts. When these remain unconscious, they serve as hooks by which another's will can enter and bend our path. But the empath, who has faced these inner specters, knows when a hand is trying to pull at a string that no longer exists. I have met such souls. They carry themselves differently, not with arrogance, but with a certain gravity. Their eyes do not dart to seek approval, nor do they dim to avoid confrontation. They remain receptive to what is true, but they let falsehood pass through them like wind through the leaves. This is the paradox. They are still open, yet they are not vulnerable. In the same way, it is as though their openness has grown teeth, not to wound, but to discern, and that discernment comes from the one place we are all taught to avoid the direct encounter with our own unconscious. To explain this, I must take you into the realm of symbols. For in the unconscious, truth wears the mask of images. Consider the dream of a woman who finds herself in a room filled with mirrors, but each mirror shows a stranger's face instead of her own. In the dream, she feels compelled to serve these strangers, to make them comfortable, to adjust herself so they will not be displeased. And yet, none of them ever thank her. She wakes with a heaviness, unable to name why. This dream is the psychic reality of many empaths. They live surrounded by mirrors that reflect only the needs of others. Their sense of self is so fluid that they confuse their identity with the shifting expressions they see. The empath, who cannot be controlled, has, in some decisive moment, shattered those mirrors, perhaps through crisis, betrayal, or the slow ache of being unseen. They have withdrawn into themselves, not to escape, but to find the original face that existed before the world demanded masks. When they find it, they realize a dangerous truth. They owe the world nothing except the authenticity of that face. And when one owes nothing, one cannot be bought, guilted, or frightened into submission. This journey inward is not without terror. The first thing the empath encounters when they stop adjusting themselves for others is an emptiness, an echoing void where their borrowed identities used to be. It is here that the shadow steps forward. The shadow says, if you stop pleasing, you will be alone. If you stop absorbing, you will be useless. If you stop giving, you will be abandoned. These are the voices of old contracts, written in the ink of childhood wounds, and most will sign again and again, rather than sit in that room and wait for the deeper voice beneath the fear. The empath who breaks the cycle waits. They sit in the darkness until their eyes adjust, and then they see it, the figure that has been waiting there all along, not an enemy, but a part of themselves they had exiled. This figure is often fierce, unapologetic, unwilling to bend for the sake of comfort. It is the guardian of boundaries, the warrior of the inner realm. When they welcome this figure back, something changes permanently. The hook of manipulation no longer finds soft flesh. It strikes the shield that is now part of their being. From this moment, control becomes impossible in the old sense. One can still appeal to their reason, inspire their cooperation, win their trust. But one cannot bind them with invisible threads of shame or fear. They have seen those threads for what they are, projections of someone else's unclaimed shadow. This is why such empaths may appear almost mystical in their immunity. In truth, it is not magic. It is the natural consequence of radical self-possession. Do not misunderstand. This does not make them cold or detached. On the contrary, their compassion often deepens because it is no longer entangled with the need to be accepted. They can say no without guilt. Yes, without hidden resentment. They can love without surrendering their center. And this unsettles those who once relied on their compliance. You will know when you meet such a person, for they move through the world as if they belong to both earth and something beyond it. This, I believe, is the highest form of empathy, not the porous self that dissolves into every pain it touches, but the rooted self that stands firm, offering shelter without becoming the storm. And yet, the path to such empathy is narrow, for it requires what most will avoid for a lifetime, the descent into one's own underworld. And the retrieval of the power buried there. There is an image that often appears in the dreams of those who are awakening from the spell of control, a narrow bridge suspended over a vast chasm, the wind whipping around them, the boards creaking underfoot. On one side is the familiar land filled with the faces they have served, the roles they have played, the identities that have been shaped by others' expectations. On the other side is a dark forest, silent, untamed, unknown. Most hesitate at the center of that bridge, torn between the gravitational pull of the old life and the terrifying freedom of the new. And here, in this suspended moment, for the psyche speaks through symbols more loudly than words ever could. The familiar land is not evil. It is simply the realm of adaptation, where the empaths learn to survive by aligning themselves with the needs of others. The dark forest is the self in its totality, the sum of conscious and unconscious, light and shadow, personal and archetypal. To step into it is to leave behind the currency of control, for control has no meaning where one belongs entirely to oneself. But before the crossing is complete, there is always an encounter with archetypes that have governed the empath's life. The first to appear is often the healer, robed in light, hands extended, carrying the warmth that has drawn so many wounded ones to the empath. The healer whispers, "If you cross, you will lose your gift. Your power is intending to the broken," and the empath must answer with a truth that feels almost like blasphemy. "My power is not in sacrificing myself to heal. My power is in being whole. And from that wholeness, healing flows." This is the first rupture in the old identity. Then comes the martyr, crowned in thorns, eyes wet with the nobility of suffering. The martyr insists your worth is proven by how much you endure for others. Your pain is your proof of love. This voice is harder to resist, for it is woven into the empath's very bones, often from childhood, when love was conditional on silence, on compliance, on carrying burdens too heavy for small shoulders. To turn away from the martyr is to feel for a moment like a traitor to one's own past. But the empath who cannot be controlled knows that to live eternally in sacrifice is to deny the self the chance to bloom. They do not dishonor their pain by refusing to stay in it. They honor it by letting it become wisdom instead of prison bars. And then, often last, appears the trickster, not malicious, but sly, offering tempting bargains. If you return to the familiar, the trickster says, you can keep your peace. You can avoid the storms. You can still smile and say the right things, and no one will ever reject you. The empath knows this voice too. It is the seduction of safety, the comfort of invisibility, the illusion that not being seen will protect them, but they also know the cost in that safety. The soul suffocates. And so they step past the trickster, and the forest accepts them. Once within the forest, something profound happens. The empath meets the shadow not as an enemy, but as kin. The shadow is not the darkness they feared. It is the unclaimed vitality, the sharpness, the capacity for saying no that had been exiled. They realized that every attempt to control them in the past succeeded because it mirrored an inner disowning, an aspect of themselves. They refused to acknowledge. When those aspects are reclaimed, the mechanisms of control dissolve like mist. This is why such empaths cannot be manipulated in the old ways. They no longer need to be liked, to feel safe. They no longer confuse compliance with love. They no longer carry the unspoken belief that they are responsible for regulating the emotions of those around them. They see clearly that much of what passes for connection in the world is actually the exchange of wounds, one person offering their submission in return for belonging, the other offering approval in return for control. Once this contract is broken, the empath stands outside the marketplace entirely. And here is the mystical truth. When an empath reaches this place, they do not become untouchable in the sense of building walls. They become untouchable because they are transparent to the projections of others. Attempts at control slide off because there's nothing left in them for the projection to cling to. Like light passing through clear water, manipulation finds no surface to distort, yet this state is not passive. It is alive with discernment. They can feel the subtle shifts in energy when someone speaks from truth or from shadow. They can hear the tension between the words and the unspoken intent, and rather than confronting it with anger or collapsing into it with fear, they simply choose this quiet, choosing the ability to walk away, to stay silent, to offer presence without entanglement, is the empath's true power. The controlled empath lives in a constant storm, feeling every current as a potential threat. The liberated empath moves through that same storm as though they are the still eye at its center. They have become like the forest itself, rooted, vast, sheltering many forms of life, but belonging to no one, and those who once sought to control them sense it immediately. Some respond with respect, recognizing a kind of strength that cannot be bought. Others react with hostility, for control loses its power in the presence of sovereignty. If you find yourself resonating with this, it may be because you are somewhere on that bridge yourself. Perhaps you have felt the pull of the forest, and perhaps you have heard the voices of the healer, the martyr, the trickster, urging you to stay behind. And perhaps somewhere deep within, you have also felt the faint but undeniable call of the shadow, waiting not to harm you, but to return you to yourself. When I speak of liberation from control, I do not speak of a single decisive act, as if one could sever all chains in an instant and be forever free. No, the psyche is not so simple, nor so easily persuaded. The patterns of control are woven into the fabric of our unconscious through years, sometimes decades, of repeated exchanges, often beginning in childhood when love and safety were linked to obedience, and where the self was required to shrink in order to belong. Even when you awaken to the illusion, the threads remain, and it is through the work of inner dialogue, what I called active imagination, that those threads are patiently unwoven. Imagine you close your eyes and allow an image to form, not one you choose, but one that rises on its own from the depths. Perhaps you see a room with no doors, its walls lined with familiar faces that seem to watch you. This is the psychic stage upon which the drama of control has been playing. Each face may carry the likeness of someone you know, a parent, a lover, a friend, a mentor, but in truth, each is also an aspect of your own unconscious. Here is the one who shames you into silence. Here is the one who rewards your compliance. Here is the one who threatens abandonment if you speak your truth. In active imagination, you do not turn away from these figures. You let them speak. You ask them who they are, what they want, and why they have been standing guard over your freedom. Their answers will not always make sense to the conscious mind, for they speak the language of symbol and emotion. One might say, without me, you would be unlovable. Another might insist, I kept you alive when you were small, when it was dangerous to be seen. This is not mere fantasy, it is the psyche revealing the original contracts you made in order to survive. For the empath, these contracts often involve the suppression of anger, the refusal to assert needs, the reflex to soothe others before tending to oneself. To break them is not an act of cruelty. It is an act of remembering that survival strategies are not meant to be life sentences. In the moment, you thank the figure for its service and tell it that its watch is over. Something shifts in the body. Tension loosens, hidden fear exhales. You may feel grief, for these patterns have been companions for a long time. But you will also feel a strange lightness, as though a part of you has been unbound from the wheel. This inner work is essential, because external control can only hook into what is still unclaimed within. The empath who has not met their own rage will be undone by the rage of others. The empath who has not embraced their own power will yield to the illusion of another's superiority, but the empath who has sat in the silent company of their shadow will recognize these energies when they arrive, and instead of absorbing them, will know exactly where they belong, not in the sanctuary of their own soul. Dreams, to become allies in this process. Pay attention to the recurring figures, the settings, the animals that appear. I recall one dream told to me by a patient, a woman who often found herself overwhelmed by the demands of others. In her dream, she was walking through a market when a hawk landed on her shoulder. She was afraid at first, but the hawk spoke, saying, "I am here to guard your vision." When she awoke, she realized that the hawk was a part of her that could see from above, that could spot manipulation before it drew near, and that could defend her clarity from intrusion. From then on, whenever she felt the old pull to surrender her boundaries, she would picture the hawk, and the feeling of being watched over returned. This is how the unconscious participates in the liberation of the empath, not by erasing sensitivity, but by arming it with awareness. Sensitivity without awareness is vulnerability. Sensitivity with awareness is discernment. And discernment is the quiet armor that makes control impossible. When this integration deepens, the empath no longer moves through life as a sponge, absorbing every vibration, but as a deep well, receiving only what they choose to draw in. They can stand in the presence of another's anger without shrinking, in the presence of another's sadness, without drowning. They understand that they are not here to carry every burden, nor to heal every wound. Their gift lies in being a mirror in which truth can be seen, not in being a container for what others refuse to carry. And there is another transformation, subtler but no less profound. They cease to fear their own autonomy. Many empaths, conditioned by years of self-erasure, experience freedom as a kind of danger, as though being untethered from others' expectations will cast them into isolation. But once they have crossed into the forest of the self, they discover a paradoxical truth, that it is only in standing fully in themselves that they can meet others in true intimacy. Connection is no longer a negotiation of needs. It becomes a meeting of equals, unshadowed by the machinery of control. From this vantage point, they look back at the old patterns with a clarity that is almost startling. They see how subtle the hooks were, how they were baited with compliments, with guilt, with appeals to loyalty. They see how the fear of rejection was used like a bridle to steer them, and they smile not with bitterness, but with the calm of one who knows they cannot be ridden in that way again. The horse has learned it is not a beast of burden, it is a wild creature meant to roam its own terrain,